3D printing. Well, this is not a 3D printer, but today's topic is 3D printing. Several weeks ago, commenter Hugh Jans, how appropriate, asked me what I thought of 3D printing, and the short answer is, I'm again it. Well, hold on. Today we're going to talk about 3D printing and wargaming, and, it's a complicated topic. We're going to be kind of going back and forth, and as we go, rather than just take some static image to show you while you're listening to me ramble on, I thought it might be nice to kind of combine this with what I've been working on. I am in the process of moving towards Chosen Men's military skirmish games in the Napoleonic Wars, slowly accumulating enough guys to do that, but I don't want to devote a whole episode to that, because it's kind of like, enough of the foreplay, get to the good stuff. So instead, I'm going to show you what I've been painting, and it's going to be a collection of miniatures from Eureka and Irregular. The Irregular miniatures are the small ones, and I'll show you a comparison later. I'm not going to be talking about that at all, because I'm mostly focused on 3D printing today. And specifically how, guys, at the end of the day, it's a tool, right? And like any tool, it can be used for good, or it can be used for evil. It has appropriate uses, and it has inappropriate uses. And when I say I'm against it, it's because I'm concerned that is so often the case, it's going to be used inappropriately. But before we talk about the appropriate use of 3D printing, I want to talk about a green dress. Kind of. I want to talk about how your brain works. When I said green dress, what did you picture in your mind's eye? Was it just a simple Crayola green, probably something, mid-length hem somewhere around the knees, probably wide straps, probably not a low cut. Now, as you're reading those words, green dress, it does depend on the context. I just gave you green dress, but you were able to picture it in your mind. Not everyone can do that. It came as a shock to me to learn that there were people for whom the words green dress were merely abstractions. And they were surprised to learn that some people, when they hear the words green dress, could actually picture a green dress. Now, of course, if you're reading a book about a green dress, it depends on the context, right? If the scene takes place in a nightclub, and we know the character is a bit of a skank, it's going to be a dress with a backless, spaghetti straps, low cut, lots of cleavage, the hemline way up near the belt. If it's a formal occasion, you might think of a long, if she's matronly, it might be, ankle length. There may be lace at the sleeves of the collar. And you don't need to hear all that. Oh, it's the Napoleonic era. Yeah, I kind of know that it's going to be a large, maybe a hoop-style dress. And, that's just the way your brain works. You fill in the gaps. See? This, by the way, I should probably talk about this a second. The cavalry that you're going to see coming up, they came with these extra muskets, and I said, you know what? I don't want to stick them on the figure. It's just one more thing to fall off, but it will make a good objective marker. So I just took 3 muskets. I stuck them together. It's a piece of plastic, came with some miniatures out of it. Anyway, that's what that is. But we're talking about green dresses and how your mind's eye is capable of filling in. And I'm confident in saying that your mind's eye does that. You're a wargamer. You're thinking 3 moves ahead. Not only do you see what's going on the table, you see what your opponent is likely to do, and you're able to see what your strategy to prevent him from doing that is likely to get him to do instead. Your brain works on a higher level. That's just the nature of wargaming. It's not for everyone. It takes a special kind of guy to engage in this hobby. But we're talking about green dresses, and specifically we're talking about how the brain works. Now this right here, this is a green dress. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hey, no, that's a 15 millimeter figure. That's not a green dress. Yeah, but here's the funny thing about this figure. He's just like a green dress. The word's green dress, I should say. I'd say, when I say green dress, the green dress is really just a placeholder for the concept of a green dress. And depending on the context of those 2 words, you're going to see very different things in your mind's eye. This little 15 millimeter Irregular miniatures figure is also a placeholder. He's not just a static, and I say Napoleonic, but he's actually from the Wars of the French Revolution range, the bicorn. He's a placeholder for that soldier. And, that's a good point. He might be a placeholder for a Republican during the Wars of the French Revolution. He might be a placeholder for a Napoleonic era soldier who just, dresses in an outdated style, much like your host. He represents the idea of a French soldier. And When you see this, your mind's eye is capable of filling in the gaps. Let's take a look at a different style of figure. See, he is in a very static pose. He's just standing. He's got his little musket at the ready. Now this guy seems to be, he's advancing, isn't he? And this guy, he's kneeling down. He's taking aim. And this guy over here, he's actually in the process of firing. These poses are all fairly static, all right? And even though this guy is in a static firing motion, if we have these guys standing next to each other, and maybe we'll go ahead and put all three of these, and we'll put two more of these guys down. See? Oh, look. They're engaged in melee. And we know, because their bases are darn near touching, that when you see this on the table, this is not simply a guy shooting, advancing, and kneeling, and three guys marching at the ready. These are two units that are locked in mortal struggle, bayonet to bayonet. Your mind's eye, when you walk past a table at a convention, fills in all of those little details. Hey, Mr. Wargaming, I thought you were going to talk about 3D printing. I am. We got to lay a lot of groundwork so you can understand how complicated this situation is. These are all metal miniatures. I'm pretty sure these are Eureka. I know these are irregular. And by the way, here's the size comparison. There's a better one over here, too. If we compare these two guys, you can see that's not too bad, actually. The one is a little bit bigger. The leader, I know what it is. This is a leader here. Look at the size of this guy. Like, he towers over his minion. Maybe that's because he's a leader. I think it's because he's 18 millimeters. Regardless, look at that. These guys are two totally different sizes, but your mind's eye is going to be able to fill in. Oh, well, he's representative, right? That's part of the way art works. The more important guys are just a little bit bigger. He looks, one might even say, epic. All of these guys are metal figures, and they were all made using the same process. Now, most of you already know this, but for those of you that don't, what happens is you have your little dolly, just a little stick figure of wire, and the sculptor will carve out this wonderful little figure with the bent sword. It always bends. My storage is a little awful. Once he's carved that out, you drop him down into a mold. You mush him into a resin that will set hard, and then you mash it down like so. And when you take those two things apart, you will have a mold that is, it's a couple of discs stuck together, something like this, and you inject the alloy or the plastic inside. You spin it to get all of the little air bubbles out, and when you pull those molds apart, out comes a bouncing baby lieutenant. What that means is that all of these figures are fairly two-dimensional. All of these guys, different scales, different manufacturers, different poses, and even a guy who looks a little more static or active like this guy is still largely confined to a two-dimensional. There's going to be a seam, and we've all trimmed off the flash. We know how this works. Why am I talking about this? Well, the 3D process does not have that limitation. And understand that when you are doing any kind of art, limitations are not limitations on your creativity. They are means by which you can channel your creativity down the most productive avenues possible. You are not to frown upon the rules. You should embrace them, because these are lines within which you are directed to improvise and do great things. The reason I say, generally speaking, I'm against 3D printing is that you don't have that linear limitation. Sky's the limit, do whatever you want. So you have situations where you can now do linked chains based on the printing process, where you can have figures that are far more dramatic than these little peasants. And here, I'll go ahead and throw up a couple of images of some of the figures that are from the Infinity line. Now, these are, of course, bigger figures. These are hyper-dynamic and hyper-stylized. And you look at it, and then you see people that are, these figures that are women crouched down with one leg splayed out to the side and guns akimbo. You see guys that are mid-leap, they're hovering 6 inches off the ground. And if a figure that is posed like this is posed in a hyperdynamic snapshot, a moment in time where they're doing one particular task. And here you get into the problem of, we go back to the green dress. If I'm talking about a formal green ball gown with lace trim at the neckline and at the cuffs, and with brocade, and I don't know, with pearls interlaced, and the more details I give you, the more specific it becomes, and the more difficulty you have reconciling what's going on with the representation versus what is going on in the real, call it, the real world, if you will. Here are some, so we'll kick back to this, right? So here's our guy who's kind of advancing at the ready, and here's a guy who's shooting, and let's see if we have another guy who's engaged in, some kind of stabby. I think that's probably something like these guys, right? Now these guys are getting ready to square off. And because of the fairly static situation here, with these two guys going at it, if we had that same hyper-stylized figures, where each of these guys was only engaged in one particular hyper-dynamic situation, but it's frozen, your brain is going to have difficulty reconciling the information of the pose versus the information of the context. And when you see that kind of clash, for example, a figure who is in the process of climbing up a wall, well, if he's in the middle of a wide open field, your brain is not going to have nearly an easy of a time picturing that crawling guy, the guy crawling vertically, replacing it in context with the guy who's doing something else. So this is why I say I am against 3D printing, because it allows for too much. It allows for too much of that dynamicness. Hey, maybe you like it. Maybe your brain has absolutely no problems rewriting what's going on in the table. Or maybe you're just one of them super smart guys that is able to do 100 million calculations at once. I don't know why you're watching this channel. You don't need me. You already know everything. But the point remains that the limitations of this style of figure printing, if you will, are pleasing to the eye. They are aesthetically excellent. Now, I'm not against 3D printing in and of itself. Like I said, I am a right tool for the job kind of guy. I own some 3D printed terrain. If you've seen previous episodes, the desert terrain that I have columns, and I have, hopefully I'll remember to pick up, post a picture right here of that terrain. These pyramids are 3D printed. Well, guess what? A pyramid is a static pose. And it doesn't matter what's going on. All that physical representation is trying to imprint on your brain is cover. Ancient Egypt, cover. Blocks line of sight. That's all we need. So it's perfectly appropriate for that kind of situation. And if one of these guys was 3D printed, that would be fine too. But, that's just kind of some general thoughts on 3D printing. It's a fine tool. If it's used properly, then it's great. And if you like the super dynamic, it's fine, right? It's an aesthetic choice. I just like to be given the minimum information necessary so that my brain can fill in the gaps as the game changes. This guy, and we've all seen games, he's laying down. You know what that means. If you walk past a convention table and you see him lying there, that means one of two things. He is injured and can only crawl, or he's dead and he just stays there for whatever purposes are within the game, right? This is a representation of a dead guy. There are people who will sell you this exact figure, but laying there dead, crying out for his mother as he dies there on the battlefield. That's fine, right? But the more specific it gets, the less useful it becomes. I got so far ahead of myself that I forgot to show you my cannons. I have a couple of cannons now from my boys. And, these cannons, just for those of you that aren't aware, they come in 3 pieces. Or is it 3 or 4? I think it's barrel, caisson, and wheels, right? This is the kind of thing that you could 3D print. This should be great for 3D printing. And I do have 2 gun crews, one of which is French, and he is in the matching outfits. I like this guy. He's like, hey, where'd that shell go? Any fun little figure? These are regular miniatures. There's a guy with a ramrod. There's a second guy with a ramrod, and then I think I have one guy who's got the 16-pound balls. Though he's only carrying one of them. Where'd he go? I guess I don't. Oh, here he is. There he is. This guy. That's the problem. This guy is dressed in gray with the tricorn. I have one gun crew in gray so that they can do double duty. With only 2 cannons on the field, we've got a big fancy lad there who's bossing him around, a guy with a bucket, and then, of course, we've got... Oh, no, you can tell he's the boss. He's the guy with the fancy hat. Appropriate use of 3D printing. These, you don't really need it. And I'll be honest with you, part of the reason that I haven't really jumped on the 3D printing bandwagon is also because it's another hobby. I don't need another hobby, man. I'll pay somebody else to do that for me. I got enough problem with paper printers in my life to have to worry about a printer that adds all the complexities of yet another dimension. Again, I want to say this is Eureka, and these guys, the uniforms here are probably a little too pale. They don't really match perfectly with the uniforms of my first set, but that's all right. They're looking pretty good. And just to show you, let me adjust my camera here for the first time so I can show you. This is my storage tray for these guys. I'm all out of room, so these 7 guys, and once again, we get into that situation. Notice that he is wearing a nice cuirass. He said cuirass. You can see it a little bit better there in the back. See the little shiny, right? But he's a cavalryman, so I may use this guy as a green dress to represent one of those more, what do they call them? A cheval? Maybe dragoon. We got a guy here. Oh, look, he's got a little horn there. So, chosen men, you do get an upgrade when you've got a bugler. I don't know which one of these guys is the leader. I meant to paint his horse white, but I kind of forgot. Kind of good-looking horses there. These guys, of course, are 2-part, right? You've got your flat piece for the rider, and you've got your flat piece for the horse. And then you stick them together, and then, wow, in this case, you do get that much more intricate design. But again, even with the dynamic pose of these guys, regardless of what they're doing, if they're riding away, if they're riding to charge, if they're moving at the trot, cavalry. It's a placeholder. You're going to have to go based on the context. And then we do have, one of the things I need to look at, and again, it's the same issue, right, is, one of the things I need to look at is what kind of glue I'm supposed to be using on these guys. But that interrupted my chain of thought. The real question is, what kind of flag am I going to give him? Right? If I want to use these guys for the wars of the French Revolution, if I want this handsome lad to be flying a flag that's appropriate for the Napoleonic era, how do I do that? Do I have to come up with 2 different flags? Or will I be able to find one? Do I just go with a tricolor? Is that appropriate if he's fighting for and I may even use these guys for the French and Indian Wars, which is a little bit nutty, but I mean, they say French. They're not colonial French, but hey, French might just be enough to reconcile your brain with what's really going on. And then the question becomes, well, do I use fleur-de-lis? What am I going to do for these guys, for the flags? And the same situation is going to arise here for these bad boys. These British guys, which I've already shown you. I've already played a couple of games with them. So we've got a total of 14. That gives us a little bit of flexibility for our chosen men. And then because chosen men is largely related to kind of a mass skirmish situation, not doing big battles yet, that's why I got these two guys. I'm going to have a wagon train. And in fact, I've got some older figures that I can use here. Hey, look at that. Now we got ourselves a convoy that needs to be protected. Is how big? How many of these guys do you need? I might have been able to get away with these too. Hey, represents 10 wagons. Well, remember, in a lot of games, one figure equals 30 men, 20 men. When you see this guy fighting, he doesn't stand for one guy fighting one guy. He stands for 20 on 20. All of this stuff is connected, and all of it is worth thinking about from time to time, just to ensure that the results you're getting on the table are what you intend them to be. And one last thought. These are figures. I'm a traditional guy. These are traditional style figures. The people that have been making these have been making these for decades. And they are responsible for giving me a lot of enjoyment out of this hobby over the last few decades. And so as a fairly traditional guy, when you tell me you've got this new hotness that you just can't wait for me to show, it's going to revolutionize everything, and you won't need those old bums anymore, I kind of tune out. I like these manufacturers. They're good guys. They've been there. I have no interest in turning my back on them. And even if the world has moved on from this style of wargaming, this is the kind of wargaming I'm going to be doing for the next 3 decades, God willing. 4 or even 5. And as long as they're here taking care of me, I'm going to do what I can to take care of these guys. Because it's the gaming I grew up on, and maybe that's the nostalgia talking. Maybe objectively, these are less pretty, but for all the reasons you talked about today, when it comes to 3D printing, I know it's a tool. Generally, I'm against it because people are going to use it for everything and everywhere without giving it as much thought as the level of artistic genius that has gone into carving even simple little figures like this. There's a few thoughts for you. Hope you enjoyed it, Huge Hands, and look for Chosen Men, Military Skirmish Games in the Napoleonic Wars, coming soon. I've only got a couple of units, and we're actually going to be doing if you haven't already seen it, I'm going to be doing a Let's Learn How to Play Together series. So look for that in the future. I'm praying for you.